The Civil War left behind an ugly legacy of racism and segregation that has gripped the United States for decades. In 1896, the Supreme Court ruled in Plessy v. Ferguson that separate but equal accommodations for African Americans were legal, impacting their future educational opportunities. Prior to the Civil War, few educational opportunities existed for African Americans. Less than 5% were literate, and American universities had only given 28 bachelor's degrees to black students. After the Civil War, Reconstruction forced Southern states to include public educational opportunities for African Americans, but this was met with adversity in Southern legislatures. Throughout the South, de jure school segregation was widespread by 1904, and across the country, African American students attended schools with inequitable funding. The disparity in education was a focus for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, which was created in 1909 in pursuit of ending the racism and segregation that plagued America. We conclude that, in the field of public education, the doctrine of separate but equal has no place. Separate educational facilities are inherently unequal. This decision in Brown v. Board of Education marked a turning point in the African American civil rights movement by desegregating schools. The NAACP utilized the Plessy decision and the 14th Amendment to carefully construct decades of legal precedent via the 1931 Margold Report. The report was pivotal for cases such as Maryland v. Murray, Gaines v. Canada, Sweet v. Painter, Sipule v. Board of Regents of the University of Oklahoma, and McLaurin v. Oklahoma State Regents, which were all instrumental in the success of the eventual Brown v. Board of Education decision. The educational desegregation of the South was pioneered by Nathan Margold, Charles Houston, and Thurgood Marshall, who were on the frontier of educational litigation in America. The NAACP's legal strategy emerged from a 1931 report by New York attorney and Harvard Law School graduate Nathan Ross Margold. The strategy focused on using the separate but equal decision to the advantage of the NAACP by showing that the separate accommodations were not equal.
It was a plan, it was an outline to chip away at segregation, at legalized segregation. And so what the NAACP purposefully looked at was how to utilize the court systems, how to utilize the justice system to actually work within the system to break down these barriers in terms of legalized segregation.
While Margold's strategy operated under the separate but equal doctrine, his approach was meant to counter segregation as a whole by incrementally building precedent against educational segregation. When discussing the segregation of schools, Margold concluded that the Supreme Court will hold these practices prohibited by the 14th Amendment when the question properly raised before it may be predicted with confidence. There were several attempts to use Margold's strategy. However, it wasn't until the NAACP named their first full-time lawyer, Charles Hamilton Houston, to special counsel in 1935 that they saw major success. Houston graduated from Harvard Law School and was the former dean of Howard University Law School. Houston oversaw University of Maryland v. Murray in 1935, which sought the admission of African American student Donald Murray to the University of Maryland Law School. While successful, the decision did not have the national impact the NAACP needed, and they were forced to expand to other states to increase influence. Missouri emerged as an excellent test case. It was a border state, and more significantly, it restricted opportunities for African American education at the university level. Lincoln University served as the only state institution that was available to African Americans, and they offered no graduate or professional degrees. In an attempt to comply with Plessy, the Missouri General Assembly created an out-of-state tuition program to send African Americans to other institutions so they did not have to build an equal university. Lloyd Lionel Gaines was an African American student seeking a law degree from the University of Missouri, but was rejected due to his race.
We have this idea that institutions, as long as they're equal, you can have separate institutions, but the reality is that they're not. They're not equal. I refer to the University of Missouri. You have the law school there, and Gaines tries to get into the law school where there's not a law school here. Well, the option was that, we'll create one for you at Lincoln University. There's not a law school at Lincoln. They had something set up in like a little temporary shop in Jefferson City, but there's no law school there, and so there was not an option.
Identifying Gaines as a perfect defendant, Houston assisted him in suing the school. Houston's arguments reflected the Margold report strategy by making the case that there was inequality in the separation, noting that only one student had been able to use the out-of-state tuition program. After losing the case in the Circuit Court and the Missouri Supreme Court, Houston appealed to the United States Supreme Court. On October 10, 1938, the Supreme Court granted certiorari, agreeing to hear the case. Houston argued before the court using the basics of Margold's strategy. Houston argued, by the operation of the laws of Missouri, a privilege has been created for white law students which is denied to Negroes by reason of their race. That is a denial of the equality of legal right to the enjoyment of the privilege which the state has set up. This established the first pillar of their argument. The separation of races in school yielded unequal educational opportunities for African Americans. The second pillar relied on the 14th Amendment. Houston asserted, the action of the state in furnishing legal education within the state to whites, while not furnishing legal education within the state to Negroes, was a discrimination repugnant to the 14th Amendment. On December 12, 1938, the Supreme Court released its decision. By the operation of the laws of Missouri, a privilege has been created for white law students which is denied to Negroes by reason of their race. The court even cited the Murray case as precedent for their decision, evidence of the legal strategy building upon itself, supporting greater changes in education. The court ended up ordering either Missouri to allow Gaines into the University of Missouri or establish a separate but equal school. The state quickly chose to build a new law school. However, the new law school lacked funding and could not equal the already established one. Before a second round of litigation could commence, Lloyd Gaines vanished without a trace. Houston left the NAACP after the Gaines victory, and his assistant Thurgood Marshall took over his position. Marshall took on Scipio v. Board of Regents of the University of Oklahoma, where the University of Oklahoma Law School denied Ada Scipio, an African-American woman, admission because of her race. After making its way to the Supreme Court, the decision cited the Gaines case as precedent, reinforcing the incremental approach as proposed by Margold. Following Scipio, the NAACP took their legal strategy south to Texas with Sweet v. Painter, which was decided in 1950. In this case, an African-American student, Heman Marion Sweet, was denied admittance to the University of Texas School of Law because of his race. While Texas quickly tried to rectify the inequality by creating a temporary, then permanent, law school for African-American students, the suit continued, with Marshall taking the next step Houston could not, arguing that separate law schools were inherently unequal. The Gaines case was invaluable to use as a base, showing that separate but equal did not hold true because Missouri did not even have a law school for African Americans. This allowed the Sweet case to take the next step, concluding, "We hold that the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment requires that petitioner be admitted to the University of Texas Law School." At the same time as Sweet, in Oklahoma, George W. McLaurin was denied his application to the University of Oklahoma for a graduate degree in education. A district court concluded the state had the constitutional duty to admit him, citing Gaines and Scipio. However, the state legislature was determined to keep him separate, even while allowing him into the law school. They required him to sit at a different table in the library, lunchroom, and classroom. This led to the Supreme Court case McLaurin v. Oklahoma State Regents, in which Marshall led a team to show that even separation in the same school provides unequal opportunities. In June of 1950, the court determined African American students must receive the same treatment at the hands of the state as students of other races. This decision took the courts right up to the brink of declaring all segregation in education was unconstitutional. However, the full ruling would not come until 1954, with Brown v. Board of Education. In Brown, decided May 17, 1954, the court ruled segregation had no place in education. This decision was the end for Margold's legal plan, started in 1931 and pushing the frontier of equality in education for decades until the monumental Brown decision in 1954. In the opinion of the court, the Gaines case is mentioned along with Scipio, Sweet, and McLaurin, showing the importance of precedent and the incremental approach proposed in the Margold report. The strategy of attacking segregation using the separate but equal doctrine and utilizing the 14th Amendment was key towards educational equality.
When you had individuals such as Houston and Marshall and other individuals that would be associated with the NAACP, then you had individuals that were bold enough to actually go and argue these cases at the Supreme Court that were unwilling to back down.
Simply put, their value in numerous successful cases over the years is enough to say that Nathan Margold, Charles Houston, and Thurgood Marshall's efforts were on the frontier of educational litigation, and they helped pioneer educational equality in America.